everyone, and welcome to our Harry, Meade and Cameron Beer webinar. Thank you all very much for joining us. How are you both, and how's this season going so far, and what's planned?
You're very, very good, Sophie. Thank you so much for having us on tonight. I always feel very lucky to chat to Harry. It's probably, to all of you guys at home, going to be a very long evening because when I went up to Harry's last year, we were just meant to do a little short interview walking around on our horses, and I think we ended up walking for about an hour on the horses, nattering away. So we're probably going to go on for a while. So if you've got a good glass of wine or something there with you, then make sure it's topped up. But yeah, no, the season's going great for me so far. Gatsby's come out really well this year and is hoping to step up to 4-star at Bicton soon. So he's feeling great. But yeah, I think really, really excited, along with all of you guys, to see Harry's horses are just off to Kentucky at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So it's been a bit of a busy day, just working the horses, obviously as normal, but then two of them left at lunchtime to go to East Midlands Airport, and they have just arrived there and are being loaded at the moment onto a plane, and they fly to Kentucky. And then obviously the badminton horses have stayed behind, and I'll spend a few days working them and then fly out and join the Kentucky two.
But the start of your season's gone well.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's very much about the prep for these big tour events. So really the first lot of runs has just been to blow away some cobwebs and get the horses out, but really with a means to an end, and at the same time obviously producing the younger horses, so hopefully they can join the big guys in a year or 4, depending on their age and stage.
I can see already some of you have found the chat option, which is perfect. And if you do have any questions throughout the evening, please drop them in the chat and we will try and get round to them. I know Nikki's put one already. Can you tell us which two have gone to Kentucky?
I can. So Superstition and Grafenacht have gone to Kentucky, or are going to Kentucky.
Very, very exciting. And Grafenacht went last year, didn't she?
Grafenacht went last year. She was 4th. She was a new ride to me. Obviously, William Fox Pitt rode her, but before that, and then he retired at badminton from sort of top level competition, and she came to me. So last year was our first season together. I took her out to Italy right at the start of the year, which we had to do as a combination to then do a 5-star, and she went really well in Italy, and she actually won by, I think she had 6 fences in hand, and then which was lucky because she had 6 fences down at badminton with William. So I thought I might have needed them, and then she went out to Kentucky and finished 4th, 1 place behind our other horse, Aoptomats, who was doing his first 5-star, and he is planning on going to badminton this year.
And obviously you produced the majority of your horses from the beginning, but probably relevant to a lot of the guys I teach in the youth programs, having a horse who's already been produced by another rider, has that been trickier? Or obviously William's done an amazing job.
Yeah, I mean, it can depend. I mean, often, I've ridden William's horses for a long time. I was sort of his rider back in 2003 and 4, and I've ridden quite a lot of horses at very short notice. When he had his bang on the head, I competed his horses for him, and when he was away at sort of various Olympic Games before that, I would compete his horses, and then but she's taken a little bit of time. She's there are probably some slight complexities in the way that she goes, really in the jumping, which makes her a little bit of a challenge. But I've enjoyed I find it quite, I guess it depends if you have a similar philosophy and approach to your training and how the horses think, and I guess a sense of responsibility of what's your responsibility and what's their responsibility. And if you've got two riders who are quite similar, it makes it much easier. That said, she's been quite an interesting one to sort of get to know physically, and I've really enjoyed that sort of challenge. And we had a good year last year, and she's feeling good at the moment. So fingers crossed.
And with her being a little bit trickier in the show jumping, what have you done then to get to know her? Has it been just more shows or just more training at home? Or I saw you moved to a hackamore, have you, rather than in a bit?
Yeah, I actually do everything with her in a hackamore. She has a bit in for the dressage test and a bit for cross country, but she does all her training in a hackamore. But she, no, it's more just understanding what her conformation allows her or doesn't allow her to do, and to sort of work with that. And is when something hasn't been, if something isn't completely orthodox and perfect, sometimes it's good just to try something different, and forget the bitting, because that's quite a small detail in it. It's really just the approach to working her and to help her to be as athletic and supple and confident as possible. And she would be an example of a horse who, the more she would try, the harder she would make it for herself. And therefore it's about being nicely, confidently nonchalant to get the looseness and the relaxation in her jump, which then actually generates an orthodox shape and more scope. So yeah.
And then was that a challenge transferring that from home at training to the competitions, or did that just flow nicely?
It flowed fairly nicely. I was a little bit surprised probably when I first started jumping her, and William said, "Look, she isn't very straightforward, and you might get a shock." And I'd obviously watched her a fair bit with him, and yeah, so I sort of played around at home and had a bit of a theory and a plan, and then that sort of seemed to work quite well in competitions as well. But William had done a great job on her, and to take over the reins from somebody who's as good as he is there's an awful lot that I can take for granted on her in other parts of her training and education, because she's got a great foundation, and he obviously had a really successful time with her.
And then Superstition, that's going with her, is obviously a totally different horse and ride to her.
Yeah, very different horse. I think this is his. This will probably be his sixth five-star. He's actually done, I think this will be his 4 5-star in the States. He was 5th at Kentucky a few years ago. He was 7th at Meriden twice. He was 12th at Burley, and then he was 6th at Badminton last year. So he's done them all pretty much, and he's a horse who is physically lovely to ride. He gets a little bit stressed in an atmosphere competing, and it's not something that he necessarily, by riding him through that, it actually probably just exacerbates it. So I took a decision a few years ago the year before, I was warming up at an event where the cross country was going on next to dressage, and he was, I could feel he was pretty anxious, and not necessarily in a fun way. There's that adrenaline and buzziness that horses get their blood up, and that's great, but for him it becomes a little bit of almost a stage fright. And I slightly thought, how conducive is this to the big one by going out and giving him a couple of prep, 2 or 3 prep runs before each big one? And is it doing more harm than good? So I actually then took him straight I took him to Burley off the back of quite a long layoff, and he was very good. And then didn't do any kind of competition between Burley and Badminton the following year. He didn't go to an unaffiliated competition or a national class or a dressage competition or show jumping competition or anything. I just took him straight to Badminton, and he finished in the top 6 there. And then he hasn't done a competition since that. So it is a slightly unusual approach, but he feels very well prepared, and I have real confidence in sort of I guess the work that we've done, that he'll be ready. And it's it's not what I would choose to do with other horses. It's not what I do with other horses, but I felt that this was an approach that I thought would work, and it seems to have worked. Of course, if it doesn't work on one occasion, I'm sure people will chuck it back at me and say, why has he done that? But it's been quite successful in the past with him.
Well, I think that is so unique to you, about how every single horse is so individualized, and that mindset of really problem solving and analyzing, I think is probably one of your biggest superpowers, would you say?
I think it's something which, I mean, I very much probably learned that from my father, about sort of understanding each horse and what their strengths and weaknesses are, understanding their body and understanding their mind, and just trying to find the right route for that horse. And that's different for every single horse, and being prepared to adapt the training program, adapt the way you campaign them, and at times adapt my style of riding, so that I can become the rider that horse needs. And obviously, there's a molding, that they develop the longer they're with you. And most of the horses we have from youngsters, so they develop into your way of going. But even then, it's still having subtle nuances in how you get on, and whether that's physically what you're doing or mentally the mindset that you approach things in.
And going back to the prep runs, I think something that is very unique to you, and you came up in conversation the other day. I was doing a podcast on cross-country speed with Sam Watson, and obviously you can go to Thorsby and get 30 time faults, and then hopefully go to Kentucky and get inside the time. We'll all have everything crossed. And you're very happy to run slow, and then run quick when you can. How do you, well, first of all, have the confidence that you're going to get it happen on that day? And B, are you then prepping the speed in other ways?
I think that look, I'm well aware everyone has different approaches, and so I'm not, I slightly mind my own thing and think about my horses, and lots of people do it in different ways, and there's no right or wrong. But for me, a lot of it is about horses, I guess, really slowing their brains down. And it's a little bit like, if they come off a cross-country course and they've had a really fast run and it's been brilliant. It's a little bit like a really fun night out, and it was great fun, but you can't quite remember what happened. Whereas if you do it in a very relaxed, sober way of them competing, I find that's where you get real bravery in the horses and real understanding, and I guess knowledge through experience. The horse develops knowledge, and they retain that, and so that's why I like doing it. And then if when you've got all of that in place, I find they don't need to practice going fast. You can just crack on and go fast. So and again, there's some horses that I would run, their schooling pace would be quicker, because that's what they need, and others it'll be settling them and them going slower. But it's whatever that horse needs.
But mentally, as a rider, how do you then go from lobbing around effectively to then coming out like a bullet?
I think that's something probably I just find fine. Like, just I don't have to practice it, and I'm late quite often for things in life, so I'm quite good at sort of catching up and being quick.
We're on time today.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, that's not something I've found, and I think it's, you know, I think there's a couple of things. Probably a lot of riders feel, understandably, that they need to practice going quickly, and then there's also, it's quite hard sometimes to jump around a really big course in that very relaxed, um, cold-blooded way, and so that's where some people are using those for practice, and some people are using it bit of speed and adrenaline because it helps them get into gear.
I mean, have you had any help with, I mean, something I've started doing this year is having a little bit of mindset help. And I've found that really useful, and for day to day with a lovely lady called Nikki Penny, but also just for my mindset at competitions to be able to swap into what I need. Have you ever had any help with that, or have you always just found that comes fairly naturally?
I've always found that comes fairly naturally. I'm quite interested in that, and the boring thing is when you're really interested in something, quite often it's not. It's something I'd like to explore more, but also probably hasn't been a limiting factor, if that makes sense. I did when I went to university, and there was a guy there who, it was a very sort of rudimentary version of what they have loads of programs now, for all sports development. But sort of before those kind of things existed, there was a program where they had, in a really sort of basic sense, they had two people, as strength and conditioning coach and a sports psychologist, and anyone who was at the university who was competing internationally in any sport could use them. And obviously for us, the strength and conditioning coach was less relevant than, say, someone who did athletics or rugby or whatever. The mindset bit, I had a little bit of education at that age and stage, which I found really interesting and great, and probably some of those things have stuck with me subconsciously. What sort of things have you been doing with Nikki?
Well, it's just been first of all a lot of evidence-based stuff. So for my horse, he can be very tricky in the start box area, and then I almost end up getting more worried about that situation than the other parts, or the warm-up and things like that. But it's been trying to use all the different times when it has gone well and convincing the brain that X, Y, and Z that you think might happen is never going to happen because it never has happened. So a lot of that has been very useful. Simple breathing techniques have been great. And we also just created a simple confidence button, which you have to sort of get into a little bit, but being able to close the eyes and visualize a brilliant moment, probably on the cross country course, and then just before you go, being able to just touch the finger, and it just brings that memory back. And it's been fascinating. And I mean, I'm just starting on the journey with her, but it's been really, really useful. And I think it's just, and also trying to stay more in the middle, not having the big highs or the big lows, just trying to feel a little bit more level throughout the day, and also being okay with things being out of control. And I think I can be, as a lot of us are, a bit of a control freak about certain things, and sometimes then certain things you just cannot control on a day, and just being okay with that. I mean, even going back to, probably you've been through this loads, but your dressage at Burley last year, just before you went in, that probably would have a while ago really thrown me when you were going around the edge. Which horse was that on again?
Yeah, it was my last horse. So I had three horses there, and it was the last one. And as I was about to go in, I'd got into the main arena and they didn't ring the bell, and I thought it was slightly strange. I cantered around and I cantered around again, I cantered around again, I cantered around again, and then the technical delegate walked over, and she had scratched her. She just, when we were taking the boots off or something, she just had rubbed her lip against the Velcro, and it was on the outside, nowhere near the bit, and there was a tiny little Nick, but it was that kind of moment where you think, well, God, what are they going to do? And I hadn't been in that situation before, and then they have to call the vet over it, and the whole thing is more of a it's nothing dare I say it, really to do with horse welfare. It's to do with like the sort of technicalities of what the sort of legal wording says about the process they're meant to follow, and which was that they dab a piece of a white material against it, and then they turn that over and they re-dab it against it. And if when they re-dab it against it, there's nothing there, there's no pink or red, then you can carry on. If there is something there, then you can't carry on. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what they were looking at. I didn't know whether. Yeah, and then they said, oh, there was something on her face, and I didn't know whether it was a nosebleed or if it was whatever. But yeah, they did that, and she was all fine, and then I carried on to my test. But I then you got a little bit off the boil because you're ready to go in, and the whole thing probably took about 6 minutes, rather than going straight in. But that's fine. I guess you get used to that kind of thing, and the older you are, the more of those kind of things you've experienced.
But I think it is just been, situations like that, God forbid if they ever happen, just trying to, at a subconscious level, be okay and letting things wash over you, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, that's messed up my plan. I had this plan to get in there at this second and do this one little bit of medium trot. And if that now hasn't happened, it's all going to go wrong.
Yes. Yeah. I always remember Andrew Nixon at the London Olympics when the thunderstorm happened, and they, didn't let him, they stopped the competition because of lightning, which again, when you're about to go in, that's a sort of but it's, it's quite like being held on course cross country, which again isn't part of people's plan, but actually it's just seeing that kind of thing as a positive, which is that you could give, you can give a horse a break, and yeah.
And going back to, someone's asked a brilliant question on the chat. So they said, I'm guessing that despite getting stressed at events, Superstition copes with all the traveling and flying without a problem. Is there anything special you have to do with him in that regard?
So yeah, really good question. The traveling in a way is quite easy when you fly, compared to if you travel a long way across Europe, because they spend far less time here. It's a few hours in a lorry to get up to the airport. We make sure that they got there in good time. So they worked this morning. They were out last night. They worked this morning. They then had a couple of hours in the stable, and then they went back out in the field, and then straight on the lorry and went up there in good time. Came off at a service station close to the airport and had a sort of 45-minute graze and a roll and that kind of thing. And then actually it tends to be pretty easy flying them. And the hard thing is the quarantine, because they come out and they basically have 4 days of box rest, because they have to go in to quarantine. They're on box rest and they can't come out of their stables. They can walk up and down the corridor, but they can't come out of the building, and they have to wait till the blood tests come back. And then they go from there to the event. So that's quite hard when you've got a really fit horse that is suddenly out of work for 4 days just before a really big one. And the main thing is just making sure they don't tie up afterwards.
And obviously you're so well traveled now. Do you have the same people you go with all the time, or do you it's different people flying them?
So again, it's Pedans who organise it, and in a way it's easier because you're with the other European-based horses that are going, and so it's all organised together as a single trip. So that a lot of the logistics are sorted for you. Whereas obviously when you're competing in Europe, you're making all of those plans, and you have to double check and triple check everything. Whereas with this, that there are there's a bit more support, and I guess more things that are out of your hands, which makes it in some ways more straightforward.
And I always think it's funny when you're doing an event over here, you panic so much about that week leading up, what to do with the horse, what not to. And I guess it kind of goes against all of that, because when they're over there, they're in the quarantine and they're not doing anything for a few days. And maybe we all need to relax a little bit about the 2 weeks leading up to an event, because they seem to perform well over there.
And you know what? Often coming back off a little bit of a break is really good for them. You know, they have a few days to just chill out. You know, like any athlete, they're going to be feeling a little bit weary in terms of the physical effort of months of training to get to that point, that actually it gives their body a little bit of a respite. And you know, the main thing is not to feel pressurized when you then first arrive at the competition, and you know, you see all these amazing looking horses sort of endlessly schooling at the beginning is actually just to give them an easy few days when you get there and hack them and, you know, wander them about and just get into a little bit of work over, you know, if they come out of quarantine on Saturday night, Sunday morning, then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they're sort of building back up, and then Wednesday they're back in normal work and the competition starts on Thursday.
And would you adopt that approach with more national 3 days over here as well now?
I think it's pretty different, because they're not, you know, it is different having that break in their training beforehand. So probably not. But I try and do the training before you get there, so that if it's an event where you're staying, you know, if it's a 3-day event, you know, I often, when I get there, I might do dressage 2 days before their test, and then I would do pole work or give them a canter or jump or something different the day before their test. So you're not getting there and just endlessly drilling them and sort of get, you know, it's horses often don't go better through 3 days of repetitive training in a row.
And then, so you've got the 2 going to Kentucky, and then there's 3 off to badminton. Fingers crossed, is there?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, there's Eoptomats, who is a really lovely horse. Someone said, I was asked by the American media when I got out to Kentucky last year, they said, we don't really know about this horse, or tell us about him, and I said, I hope he's the best horse no one's heard of, because he was sort of quite under the radar, and I felt that he was just coming into his own. He's a big gangly horse, and I really rate him and really like him. He's just a nice, confident guy who is, you know, he's got a good brain and he enjoys his job, and he I sort of felt that he was just sort of ready to hopefully shine, and then he finished 3rd there, which was great. And then he went to Burley and finished 9th behind the 2 mares. So actually it's the same 3 horses that went to Burley, and he finished 9th behind Animal Valona, who finished 4th for the 2nd year running, both times behind Cavalier Crystal, who finished 3rd for the 3rd year running at Burley. So and she was 4th at badminton last year. So those guys are pretty experienced. Hoppy would be the first horse able to match, would be the least experienced out of them. But Animal Valona is a good mare. She's very she's a lovely a real trier, a very sensitive horse who slightly lacks confidence in herself. I don't mean necessarily confidence to a fence, but just confidence with everything. And she's quite highly strung and quite a warrior, and she would be very easy to offend. So with her, it's about sort of holding her hand and giving her the confidence in all 3 phases. But she did 2 4-star longs and has done 2 5-stars, and she was 3rd at her first 4-star long at Blenheim, and then 1 Bramham as her 2nd one, and then she's done 2 Burleys and been 4th of both of them. So yeah, she's hopefully, this will be her first badminton, but I really love her, and I hope that she'll get a good trip around there. And then the last one is Cavalier Crystal, who's slightly the opposite. You know, she's a sort of a sort of ratty old thing in that she is she's tough, and she's sort of tough and stubborn in a good way, and is she's very game. She looks like quite an ordinary horse. You know, you wouldn't pick her out in a collecting ring, and she would be the kind of horse that would have been sort of repeatedly overlooked or ignored. But she's done 5 stars. As I said, she was 4th at Burghley last year, 4th at Badminton last year, and has been 3rd at Burghley 3 years running. So she's a pretty cool horse. And each time I wouldn't go in sort of thinking that she could do that, but she just does keep doing it. So she's a goodie.
I think the way you're smiling about her just sums her up. I think whenever I've watched the cross country at any of these events, she's the one that's caught my eye with just the ears pricked and very much wanting to get on with it.
Yeah, and I've ridden her since she was a 5-year-old, and she was I never really thought she'd be a top level horse, because she would tow you, she would tow herself beyond the takeoff of a fence, and she also would she would sort of scamper. She wouldn't gallop, and when you went to go quickly, if you saw a moving distance to a fence from quite a long way out, and you just quietly went to move up on your stride, she wouldn't take a longer stride. She would take a quicker stride that was the same length. So she would arrive at the fence sooner, but she wouldn't have gained anything on each stride. So she would still be off it when you got there. And, you know, it took a long time to just settle her and get her to breathe and relax and allow her stride to develop, rather than scampering. And she's become a super fast horse, but I definitely wouldn't have I didn't think she was going to be a 5-star horse, so, and I didn't think she was going to be a fast horse.
But you still chose her for a reason, though. You know, where all the horses bar Grafanac, did you have them all from sort of 4, 5, 6-year-olds?
So Anna Morvallona was the only other one who she came to me when Sam Griffiths, so he did a great job producing her, and then he went off to train the Kiwi team, and stopped competing at a high level, but there was a little bit of rebuilding, but that was also about just developing a partnership and a relationship. So we sort of we ended up I just, which I tend to do quite often with horses, I just dropped her into whatever level I felt was suitable for her, disregarding what she might have done or whatever, to just try and develop that partnership, build that partnership, and then move forwards.
And a couple of great questions in the chat again about lovely Cavalier Crystal. So one person said, is there a reason why you kept going with her if you didn't think she was going to be a 5-star horse?
Yeah, really good question. So so there's 2 different scenarios you can get. One is that you hit a point where you feel actually a horse has reached its limit, and obviously you don't then keep going beyond that. And there's a really common mistake, which is to always want more. And you see it with everyone of every level, whether they're a rider, whether they're an owner, whether they're a parent. That somebody is competing at B100, and then they do a few of them, then they're desperate to move up to novice, and then they do some of them, and they're desperate to move up to intermediate, and they're always keen to move up, and then the wheels start to slightly fall off, but they think they can go up again. And actually, it's trying to realize that sometimes if a horse is not capable or happy, then it's actually the best outcome for a horse is to be really enjoying it at the level that they're comfortable at. So that's obviously one scenario, and then the other one, which was more the case with her, which was that if I had to forecast a future, I didn't think that she would have the scope, and I didn't think she'd have the speed, and I felt that as she moved up, but it was almost like this sort of this limitation wasn't on her now, it was just ahead of us. So she was okay at the moment, but I didn't think she'd go beyond the next level. But when she went to that level, I didn't think she'd go beyond the next level. I remember moving her up to intermediate, and the fences felt massive. And she now jumps around a 5-star. And she's got scope to burn. But even at home, she doesn't feel that scopy. And I don't jump her very big at home, but she hasn't run above intermediate for probably 4 years, certainly 3 years, but she does 5 stars twice a year. But I don't sort of tend to tap into her scope until when she needs to, if that makes sense. So at home, you can, if on a normal day, if you're jumping at home, you can start to feel that you're sort of reaching a limit when you're not jumping a particularly big fence, but that come the last day of a 3-day, she's found 2 more foot of scope.
And do you find then sort of fitting in what works around the horses then becomes hard if you wanted to then, I don't know, push for team selection, where you have to go to certain events, or whether you do or don't, I don't know. But if you wanted to do more that route with, say, her, would you have to compromise, or would how would that work?
Yeah, no, they're very sort of, it's a very different sort of process now compared to in the days where they used to have selection trials, in that now they look at form, they look at recent form being sort of more relevant than old form, and really obviously form at sort of the higher levels. So we don't really get given a sort of a pathway or route. My approach has always been, if I'm confident in the horses, to pick the toughest event there is, and that's why I tend to always aim for Badminton, Burley, Kentucky, and rather than going off to another event or further afield event, or an event with a smaller field of competitors. It's actually just aiming for those, and I produce them in the way I do it in between, and that might not be demonstrating that they go fast week in, week out, but they if they're repeatedly among the fastest in the field when it matters, then hopefully that's sort of answered the bigger question.
And staying on that topic for a sec, so do you think there is a big difference, everyone talks about it now, between a championship horse and a 5-star horse, or is still a great event horse a great event horse?
I think a great event horse, but there is definitely, because your championships are generally not top level events to a certain extent, in that everybody understands, and there's completely logical rationale behind why the Olympics is a showcase event. It's a short and cross country course around a softer track that is okay. Quite often there's a sort of an intensity of fences, but both in dimensions and definitely in terms of technicality, it doesn't compare to the likes of what were traditionally the Grand Slam events. And that's, there's no argument that everybody knows that, and therefore you're looking at horses that can be as competitive as they can be in the other phases without being as taxed so highly in the cross country phase. And there are very few horses in the world that can do both, or can do both really with a chance of winning both. I mean, Lordship's Graffalo would probably be Lordship's Graffalo, maybe Colorado Blue, Austin's horse. London 52 obviously won Badminton, but that was on a year where there's through no fault of his or Laura's, but he won Badminton, but with a long hold exactly halfway round. So, and that he is an amazing horse, but he's a championship type of horse. Dublin is more of a championship type of horse, and so yeah, there's very definitely that, and it's not always as rational as saying, well, you go out and buy a championship horse, you go out and buy a 5-star horse, because there's a little bit of romance involved in that. When you go and try a horse, you have to a little bit fall in love with the horse, and that's not always rational, and sometimes that comes down to actually what type of horse you feel at home on and you enjoy riding, rather than just what is going to be a ticket to a particular type of event. And the other thing is that there's no guarantee. I've seen quite a few people who have sort of really torn themselves up emotionally over selection and felt that they've been sort of chewed up and spat out, but that is normal in any sport where there's selection involved, and there's actually I really enjoy riding the horses I'm riding, and I enjoy going to the events I'm going to, and you like to think there's a compatibility to a certain extent, but there is, it's a straightforward fact in the sport that there has been a divergence, and that's fine, and if, not that anyone would wish it, but if the sport, not through choice but through it being forced upon it, came out of the Olympics, then probably that sort of two-pronged fork in the road would become a single linear ladder, from 1-star to 5-star, and you would have one type of horse, but at the moment it's understandable that there's a lot of people who are riding horses that are championship type of horses, but if they're not quite good enough, then there's not necessarily an alternative route for them to go to the very top and the other side, because of what we talked about.
No, I can totally attest to it is a love affair. I remember Mum and I just seeing Gatsby's head over the door and looking at each other saying, we need him. We don't even need to see him really, but we did, obviously. And I think when you have that love affair, you're happy to work through the problems a little bit more and a little bit easier than when you bought one that you think you should have bought, and then something goes a little wrong. And I think then you don't have that relationship from the word go, and then I think it's harder to work through the problems sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely.
And when you're going to look at a young horse, then what are the main things, bar falling in love with it? What are the other main things you are looking for?
I think you can go through your checklist of walk, trot, canter, jump, conformation, stamp, bravery, carefulness, scope, speed, footwork, all of that kind of thing. But then there's also just that feeling where you feel this is the type of horse I'd enjoy riding, and the kind of horse that I could trot to a 5-bar gate on, and and that is probably a little bit that's it's probably a bit more of a feeling than a checklist, as it were.
And if you then flipping it, because a lot of our lovely audience might be looking for a different type of horse, I don't know. If you were going to try a horse for your lovely children, Lily and Charlie, what would you be looking for then? Still something to trot over a 5-bar gate?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing with children is to be under-horsed, not over-horsed. Mm-hmm. From the point of view of confidence, and it's always better they want to do more than they are doing rather than wanting to do less than they're doing. I mean, somebody said to me, we were competing together as a family the other day, about 3 weeks ago, and there was someone I hadn't seen for a few years, an older competitor who was there, and he said to me, he said, did I hear one of your children's competing here on the loudspeaker? And I said, yeah, both of them are. They're 12 and 14. And he said, does that not worry you? Which I thought was slightly surprising, because he used to ride at 5-star level, has been around a long time, and I said no, it doesn't, because yeah, there's lots of things that I haven't taught them, but they know how to get straight for a fence, and they know how to walk a course properly, and they know how to leave a horse alone, and they know how to kick, and they know how to be independent from the horse. And so actually a lot of those kind of things are probably more important. And when you're choosing horses, yeah, it's that's more important than being too fancy, because it's nice to be fancy, but if you yeah, if everyone goes home in tears, it's not as fun.
And then at what stage would you want the fancy? When do you get to that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I guess but then, yeah, I mean, it's a contradiction, because you like I said, Cavalier Crystal probably still hasn't got that, and you get another horse. Sometimes you get a horse that you have your horse in your yard, and you have a couple of horses coming through that you've had from youngsters, and you think that they're going to be absolute superstars, and there's quite an ordinary horse that just keeps plodding on, and that's the one that gets to the top. So yeah, it's slightly looking. That's a bonus, but it's not necessarily a core ingredient.
And I mean, I could again totally attest. My lovely young rider horse we had. I mean, I started riding him when I was 15 for his owner, and we never thought he'd go above 90. He was sort of fat and a little bit, not scopeless, but he didn't give you a great feeling. And we were just happy if he did the 100 the following year, and then just kept going until he went 4-star, and actually probably was the safest horse I ever could have moved up through the levels on, because each level just kind of felt easy, but a bit, just sort of did it. And then, it made the steps up very, very easy and probably very safe.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a real partnership.
Yeah, totally. And obviously, like myself, you said earlier you went to university. I mean, I certainly went to university not necessarily intending to do what I do now. Did you always go to university wanting to then ride afterwards?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and that was something that my father sort of felt quite strongly about. He went to university and had a career in the sport, and I knew probably from the age of 2 that this is what I wanted to do. So it was but it was great, because you also don't come out of school and suddenly become like completely inundated and busy. It takes time to work away and try to build up. I was riding young horses for people, and backing youngsters, and schooling horses, and all that kind of thing. And it takes time to develop that. You get more by the time you get to a stage where actually you've got enough horses, and you've learned the skills about the first and foremost, you're offering a service. And when you get to the point where you're the service you offer, which might be that you're working on someone's horse for it to go back to their son or daughter, or to be sold, or whatever, the better you get at it, and the more in demand you are, then you can start to try and work with people who have the same aim as you, which is to try and have horses to go up the grades. But that all takes time to develop, and so actually by the time I left university, I was just about getting too busy I couldn't have done another year and done well at university. But if I'd not gone to university, I would have been not that busy as an event rider for the first couple of years. So it actually worked really well, almost alongside.
And what did you study at uni?
I studied history of art, which is nothing to do with horses, but I enjoyed it. and I did it. I enjoyed it because I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew therefore I wasn't going to have it as a career, and it wasn't like doing work. It was doing something I was really interested in and enjoyed, and I had a great time.
you could tell us about the lovely artwork behind you.
I could.
We've had a couple of questions on the chat. Do either of us play Eventing Manager? Do you know what Eventing Manager is, Harry?
I do. I haven't played it, I'm afraid, but I think it's a great concept, and I know lots of people really enjoy it, and it's a very clever concept, and the concept's slightly different to the scoring of actual eventing. I have lots of very in-depth conversations with Sam Watson about the the past and the future of the sport, and so I'm fairly familiar with it. I take it you're
I am into it, yes, definitely, and I will be spending all my money on you, don't worry. And for anyone listening at home who thinks, what on earth are they talking about? It's a brilliant concept that Equa Ratings came up with, where you can go on and buy different combinations to pick your team for big 5-star events and some of the 4-stars. So if you haven't checked it out, make sure you go and do that. Another great question that's come in, do you have any young horses that you think have the potential to be 5-star horses?
Yeah, I hope so. I do, and we'll see. I mean, it's a lot of the horses we've had that have gone to 5-star have we've had from unbroken 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and it's fun seeing them develop up the grades, and yeah, I hope so. We'll just keep producing them, and hopefully, you'll see them in a few years.
And do you have a strict plan, like at 6 they have to be doing this, 7 they have to be doing that, 8, 9, 10?
No, I have I guess. So I take slightly the hare and the tortoise approach, which is that the tortoise normally beats the hare because it's about just giving that foundation. I know what I want my 4-year-olds to be doing, and it's all quite basic, but I want them to be doing that really well and established and confidently, that I know what I want my 5-year-olds to be doing, and so on and so on. And actually, it seems quite often like you're sort of keeping the brakes on, but because they tend not to have a backward step, they actually plod on up and get quite often to a decent level reasonably young by just going in that sort of softly way. So I do, but then also I'm very aware that if a horse has like if it's a very big horse, a very weak horse, or if it started later, or if it's a slightly overly careful horse or whatever, then we just deviate onto that horse's own program.
And I know this is always a question that comes up with regular clients. How do you know when to step up? And what would be your thing that is a non-negotiable for what a horse has to achieve? I don't know, before then it steps up to novice or intermediate.
Yeah, it's a feeling, and it's a feeling, and it's all 3 phases, and then it's not yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in other words, once they've gone up, they tend to sort of, the idea is that when you go up, they don't notice a difference, and you don't notice a difference, and then they go up again, and then they go up again, and then when they jump around something, they keep doing that, so that actually they go and jump around something really big, and it feels the same as it felt jumping around a 90 or 100 on them, just in a relative way.
And have you ever then in the past made a mistake and then had to go back down a level?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, inevitably, and part of learning is learning from experience. And what that means is doing something and it doesn't work, and you'd know next time not to do it the same, so you do it a different way, and that might not work for different reasons, and then you don't do it the same again. So you learn from lots of different experiences, and you learn from other people, and you learn from other people's experience as well, and you learn from your own good experiences, and you develop a system, and you also develop a feel. And so your system and your feel are two different things, and quite often pulling in different directions. And with that, yeah, I wouldn't be, like I say, if I get a new horse, I wouldn't be remotely self-conscious about, if I felt, I'm happy to hop straight on. If they still did catch rides, I'd be very happy to hop on and have a crack straight at a 5-star, in the right circumstances. But at the same time, if I got on a horse and I felt that it needed to go back and have, either some foundations put in place or a partnership developing or some, whatever, I wouldn't be at all worried about dropping the horse down a level to build back up.
And you spoke a second ago about also listen to everyone around you. One of our earlier questions was, I'm not going to read the first part because I know they're talking about me, but but they said, what would regular training look like for you from an instructor, and how does that work?
Sorry, just ask that again. What would regular training?
Yeah, so with an instructor yourself, who helps you on the floor, and how often do they come out, and what does that session look like?
Yeah, so I guess it would be probably more often than not, it would be for a particular to add something in a particular way. So it might be working with a jumping coach. There's a really great guy called Grant Wilson who I do stuff with, and for me, part of that is actually just about having the challenge of someone else building a show jumping course with some quite difficult lines, and they're basically setting down a new fresh challenge. Because when you do something year in, year out for quite a long time and you're working horses, it can become a bit lonely, and B, it can become a little bit, you utilizing the same, not necessarily the same exercises, but you think about you think about building courses in the same way, and that kind of thing. So it's quite fun having that, mixing it up with someone else coming in, and then with the dressage, it might be you might be just working on if it's someone I haven't seen for a while. I've done some really good stuff recently with Dickie Waygood, who I hadn't worked with before this year, on the flat, and I wanted to sort of change it up a little bit, and he's come in and he's been brilliant, and some new exercises and a new way of looking at things, and equally some things are old things which I hadn't heard for 20 years, and it's just bringing them back to the fore, or explaining different things in different ways, and so that's been great. And it might be working with a judge, to do some test riding and get their perspective on it. Quite often I'd have an idea beforehand if I was on the flat, if I wanted to just get stuck into way of going, or if I wanted to ride through test movements. I guess it's cherry picking different things, and sometimes I've had situations where I used to, quite a long time ago, train with Yogi Breisner, and a couple of years ago I hadn't trained with him for quite a few years, and I rang him up about 3 weeks before Burley, or a month before Burley, and said, would you be able to come out? And that was more because I felt I was quite happy with how they were going. And I was working with someone at the time I was working with Ian Woodhead, and it was going really well. And equally, things sort of felt like, I almost wanted to not throw a cat among the pigeons, but I wanted to almost get a new look on it, and and I think I'd probably been in this sort of status quo for a couple of seasons, and so it's just actually intentionally disrupting that, and getting a fresh pair of eyes.
I think that's really, really interesting, because I think, as a coach myself, I try and encourage clients to go to different people who bring different things, as long as they are good, and then put that again all into the melting pot. And I think what you were saying there is easy at home, isn't it? We have our certain priorities and things we do and exercises we go to perhaps quite regularly, and we think we're challenging ourselves in that. But then I went for a session with Kylie Roddy the other day, and again, just a completely different exercise that I wouldn't have thought of, showed completely different problems that I didn't think I had, purely just because of what was set up, and I wouldn't have set it up like that. And it just makes you.
So it's quite Jock Paget, the New Zealand rider, when before we actually talked about it, and then he went back to New Zealand, so it didn't work. But we sort of had an idea. We'd both be thinkers, and we discussed about doing a day at each other's yards where the other one actually rides all the other horses. So you ride them almost as if you're trying them, and you sort of, sometimes something stands out to you, and it's having that mindset. I like that. It's nice training with people. You get that communication, and often it's nice to have a mirror held up to you. So what do you think about this? And you articulate things much more than if you're just on your own.
I couldn't agree more. There's been another couple of questions pop up. One of them is, we were talking about the young horses, and have you got any plans to start breeding horses?
We tried with Cavalier Crystal a few years ago. So they've been because I seem to have ended up with lots of good mares, and they quite often at a 5-star would the best placed mare would get a free embryo transfer, and so these have sort of been accumulating, and we've got Cavalier Crystal, Animal Valona, Grafanax, and other mares at home. And we tried a few years ago with Cavalier Crystal, and Grafanax owner tried with her when she went from William to me, and in both situations it wasn't successful, and it was also quite disruptive and invasive for them. And I would like to, but at the same time, it's not that great when they're top level competition horses and they're trying to do that. It's hard for them to do both, even with embryo transfers. So yeah, in time we might become the fool who breeds for the wise man to buy.
I'm certainly that fool. I love my breeding, and if I had lots of money and land, I'd be having a field full of 50 broodmares. I find it fascinating with all the different bloodlines and all of it. And you never know, you might be breeding a 5-star horse for one of your children one day out of a Crystal Cavalier.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, so after Badminton, obviously we'll see how they are, and then there'll be more heading to Burghley again.
Yeah, but we don't really think about, I very much look at a season as two completely separate halves. We make a plan straight after the season finish, after each horse's respective 3-day event last year, and then my life doesn't exist after 3 weeks time from now, and then we quite quickly regroup.
And that's the same with the younger horses as well, or do they have more of a full season plan?
No, they have more of a full season. So the young ones will run through, and then obviously sort of any 2, 3, and 4-star will have their respective targets. But the young ones will run through, and they will actually, for obvious reasons, they will be busiest. So we'll have loads of horses competing the week after Badminton, and again straight after the end of the season. I normally, when most people go away on holiday, I quite like to do sort of 6 weeks of really intensive stuff with, you know, with the babies. Yeah, it's a really nice time. You know, October, November, often before the going gets too soft, they get out to quite a lot of dressage and show jumping competitions, a lot of cross country schooling, and then they're sort of ready to go for the following season.
So behind the 5 top dogs, how many do we have in the yard?
So there would be there's a couple of 4-star horses, a couple of 3-star horses, and then quite a few 5-year-olds.
Because you actively wanted to get a load of that age, or you just sort of ended up with that?
No, I probably had a bit of a gap, because we've got this really great crop that, you know, things go in cycles, and it's not just now. For the last sort of, yeah, I've had 9 horses about Burley in the last 3 years. You know, we've had and quite, you know, we've had sort of 5-star horses for probably 3 or 4 years now, and before that, you know, so they have that in a way has meant that probably I was less productive with 3 and 4-year-olds, and actually I had a few horses that I'd bought as unbroken 3-year-olds, and they were really nice horses, and we sold 3 of them, which would be sort of going, they'd be sort of 4-star horses now. We sold them last season, and that's part of, unfortunately, you know, we have to do that every now and then. So I was then quite conscious last year that we were going to have quite a gap. So, like London buses, found a few 4-year-olds and some were 3-year-olds from the previous year. So they all come as the same year group.
And it feels like you've been at 5-star ever since, you know, Midnight Dazzler onwards, and never had a break. Have you ever felt there's been a time in your career that you didn't have any top horses? Yeah. Yeah,
there's been a few stints, sort of, I think 2000. I had 2 years, 2010, 11, and then I think 15. Yeah, so there's been a few gaps, and it's and I guess, you know, my approach has always been to have, you know, I always had a small yard, and I like to do things on a sort of very bespoke level with the horses. I like to sort of really get to know the horse. I do all the galloping, I do all the schooling, all the jumping, all the I used to do all the road work, everything, and I still really try and ride as much as I can, and I guess what we sort of, I guess you should develop the confidence that we knew how to produce horses well. So it was then taking that sort of very individualized, small scale approach and multiplying it slightly. So it's not a big program now, but it's the same thing, but with more horses, which is quite tiring because, you know, it's still trying to do it in that original way, but with more horses.
But you have a few riders now. Do they help with the riding, or?
They do, but it's still, yes, because it's really important to have, you know, for example, when I'm away next week, Kentucky, the Badminton horses still need to be doing something. It's a support, you know, like we'll gallop them quite often in pairs, but and Molly, who does the galloping with me, she and I have ridden up the gallops on so many different pairs together side by side that I know that she can do it absolutely like clockwork for that horse, which will be different to each horse. And you know, it's something I've always been really keen on is is really clear communication and discussion. So there's no ambiguity or just two people just getting on and doing their own thing without working together. And yeah, I mean, I'm lucky to have a really great team around me, and the two linchpins in our team are Jess and Molly, who are Jess has been with us for 18 years, and Molly for 11 years, and they are absolutely brilliant. They are so invested in the horses. I think the biggest thing is they love horses. They absolutely love horses, and they very much, we subscribe to the same thing so deeply, that they are, and obviously Rosie, my wife, as well. I think sort of the four of us are very much working for the same thing, and then on top of that, we have the wider team who are, they work so hard, and some of them will come to the big events, but it's really under the guidance of Jess and Molly.
Well, I think it's a testament to you, your family, and your system that those two have been there for so long, and also the likes of recently Barney Brotherton and Musa coming through your system, and hopefully going on to have great careers as well.
Yeah, it's we've always said we produce horses and we produce people, and it's a fun way of looking at it, and they've been great assets. Tim Rogers was here for 7 years before that, and he now coaches one of the regions for the juniors. There's been a good gang who have come through, and it's been immensely helpful, because if you can find somebody with the right raw ingredients and talent and work ethic and values and desire to learn, then you can try and help produce them, but also they can the better someone is, the more you can help, or the better they get, the more you're helping them, but also the more they're helping us as well.
And I mean, one of the main reasons I went down the coaching route was because I love the idea of problem solving and having to think outside the box, and obviously that is very much part of your ethos with how you train your horses. Is that does that then develop you to love the coaching of those guys as well? Do you really enjoy that side of things?
Yeah, I do. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy. I go and I do a certain amount of external teaching, and I enjoy that, but I enjoy it more when you can really get stuck into somebody in terms of knowing their characteristics and drilling down in quite a thorough way, and getting a sense of permanence, rather than just sort of the odd casual bit of help which may not have the same legacy.
So you never know, after your riding career, you might be the next Chris Bartle or Dickie Waygood taking over the British team.
Yeah, I think it's whether a bit of it is how much you can feel that enjoyment of training horses, and I guess you don't know, the moment I do some coaching, but I do a lot of riding, and whether I could be content just coaching, I don't know.
I can tell you it's still just as nerve-wracking watching
watching
them. In fact, more so because you can't get on and help them in the competition.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it is. And I actually think I listened to a podcast the other day with Nicola Wilson, who obviously has very much adopted that role, and she says she does get a real buzz from almost riding that horse through somebody, and very much does really enjoy that process. So maybe we've got that for you in the future, Harry.
Maybe.
And we've had some more brilliant questions coming in. So going back to the breeding, is there a preferred stallion or bloodline you love? I mean, you've always loved a thoroughbred horse.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always say the breeding doesn't tell you if it's the right horse, but it might tell you it's the wrong horse. And from that point of view, I feel they need to so I always like to know the breeding before I look at a horse, or even before I look at a horse on a video, because it gives you a context. And if there's something which is lacking in the breeding and it lacks on what you see, then it's probably a no. But if I'd say the biggest thing is just having sufficient quality and blood, and then the rest is slightly irrelevant what it is, in my opinion, and that's why I would look at the horse in terms of assessing the actual horse rather than the paperwork. But I do like them to have a suitable degree of blood in there.
And obviously, a lot of people talk about it needing a lot of quality, but what does quality really mean other than being a thoroughbred?
So it's a really good question. It probably is a number of things. One is, and this isn't necessarily right or wrong. This is probably just a personal take on it. But I would have said it's about light touch, so that there's that lightness and quickness of reaction speed, and whether that's reaction speed to external things, which makes them to a degree harder to ride, or whether it's reaction in a good way in front of a fence, or whether it's the reaction of a change of gear, and then ability to gallop and stay, in other words, not fatigue so quickly, and then but that obviously on its own, you're going to Doncaster to pick up a 500-pound horse at the sales, and lots of them would have lots of that, but it's then looking for the rest, which is obviously the movement, the jump, and the temperaments. But to me, that you can assess in the horse, but there's no point in having only that.
And again, going back to then the breeding, you can have, I think it was Mark Todd's NZB Campino, or one of them was only 25-30% thoroughbred.
Yeah. I mean, Superstition is something like 32%. Graffenact, I think, is 38 or 40%. Animal Valona is about 90%. They're all so it actually is. That's why I think it's seeing it on paper combined with how you would judge them in the flesh. But if they're lacking in both, that's when I would stay away.
And I think also it's a good reminder. Sometimes I don't do loads with the racing world, but I was lucky enough to go into Paul Nicholls' yard the other day, and just looking around there are all thoroughbreds, but all shapes and sizes. You forget that even the thoroughbred itself is not just one model.
Yeah, of course.
You can have big, fat, chunky thoroughbreds, and you can have little whippet thoroughbreds, and it's reminding yourself of that. And even Lordship's Graffalo, it wouldn't necessarily look like a little lean, mean machine. He's a proper substantial horse. A lot of the horses, he's the stamp of a lot of the horses that really excelled in the sort of 90s and 2000s, that looked, if you saw them as a stamp, they looked probably like hunters, and your traditional hunter, was the ingredients. The reason why Ireland produced so many hunters so easily is because they're quite, being an island, with a they had the Connemara pony, they had the draft, and they had the thoroughbred, and you cross the thoroughbred, or you sent the mare that pulled the plough in the field and the carts to church on a Sunday. You sent her to the local thoroughbred, and it produced a half-bred hunter, and then you send that half-bred hunter to a thoroughbred, and then it would produce a 3/4 bred event horse. And that was basically the ingredients of, that is why Ireland for decades and decades has mass produced good event horses. And a lot of those horses in the sort of 90s and 2000s looked like slightly plain hunters. In other words, they looked like half-bred horses, but actually when you look at their breeding, they were more often than not 7/8 thoroughbred, but they looked like they had real substance. And that's almost the best type of horse. I think it was the Welton horses as well.
Exactly, yeah. But if you think about it, some of quite a few of Pippa's horses, your Pippa Funnels horses, you'd say Supreme Rock, Cornerman, you'd say, and not Primrose Pride. He was a sort of real quality lightweight horse. But if you think of, okay, Moonman, Williams' horse was quite plain, but Polly Stockton had some quite good horses that came from that same type of breeding, where they were probably 7/8 bred, at least 3/4 bred, but they look plain, but they would gallop for 12 minutes on the bridle.
I think it's so hard. So for everybody listening in at home and myself, if you aren't necessarily wanting to get to the 5-star, you want to maybe have a horse that's going to win on the way up, and those horses do find that sometimes a little bit trickier, and it is easy to get blown away by that beautiful dressage horse that is going to trot for an 8 or a 9, and you just got to try and get it to leave the poles up. It's hard to think about which one is right for which job again.
Yeah, totally, and the answer is they're probably all imperfect, and that's the job of the rider, to actually cope with limitations. Very few horses have 3 good phases, and you're trying to, doesn't matter what level it is, doesn't matter if it's pony club, riding club, low level eventing, high level eventing, you're always trying to help in certain ways. And the better you are at your job, the more people say, gosh, I wish I had that horse, it looks absolutely perfect. But there aren't many horses that are perfect.
And if they are, they probably then have a soundness issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Somebody said, which a few people have also agreed with in the comments, I'm happy you have so many top horses, but I miss your cross-country commentary.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I really enjoyed that. But you can't sort of do everything.
No, it's hard, but again, I think you're brilliant at the media, Harry. So please keep doing it when you can. Another question. Somebody said, I'd like to know how often you're surprised by the way a jump rides, and if you can expand on what you have learned from that.
Yeah, really, really, really good question. Who asked that?
That was Rachel Fairbairn.
Well done, Rachel. Yeah, excellent question. So occasionally, yes, and I will go back. If a fence rides differently to how I expected it to ride, then maybe once every other season or something, I will go back at the end of the competition out to the far end of the cross country to go and walk it, to go and look at it, because, and it's particularly if you've ridden multiple horses round, so you're seeing the fence in its true light rather than just through the eyes of a single horse. And I will go and re-walk it. And I remember doing that. I was leaving Mill Street a few years ago, and I was trying to catch a ferry, and the engine was running, and I hopped on my bike and I cycled. The cross-country course is on a completely different site to the main event. I cycled down the road, cycled the cross-country course, cycled to the far end of the cross-country course to go and look at this fence before I whizzed back, jumped in the lorry, and then raced for the ferry. Because and that's where you keep learning, and you try and add that into your repertoire and your learning to see, so that you can bottle that. And it might be a one-off, but there's probably something there which you're going to see in a different guise at some point in the future. So
I'm sure Rosie's very happy, your wife, when she's at home saying, Harry, the dinner's ready, and you're there racing around all these courses saying, but the B90 at Morton just didn't ride how I thought it would.
Yeah, exactly.
Another great question. If you could ride any horse other than your own, past or present, around a 5-star, who would you choose and why? And maybe I'm going to counter that with in each phase as well, different event horses.
Oh, really, really interesting. I mean, you get asked this question so often, and it's very easy to, just say sort of whoever the current superstar is. But I think it's, I love, at the moment, on the circuit, and Austin has done a great job with him. I love Colorado Blue. I think he's he's a fast, rangy horse. He's a proper horse, who's totally cut out for that level, and he's been really successful with Austin. Yeah, I mean, it's also quite good not to covet. Yeah, it's sort of it's important to like just appreciate. You see in the show jumping someone like Falco, who's a great show jumper, Tim Price's horse. But then that really loopy jump is so impressive in the show jumping, probably makes him a little bit more difficult in the cross country. And that is where eventing is amazing. Is you've got these three almost contradictory requirements. You've got the round movement and the complete submission in the dressage, and then you've got the flat galloping, fast, highly independent thinking horse, which in a way lacks submission. To a certain extent, it's a different type of submission in the cross country. Who has to be very brave and quite resilient, to then the horse that's very careful, which is often different to being brave. So it's yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is they come in all shapes and sizes.
And I think that's the beauty of it as well, that, in the show jumping or dressage pure world, you buy the horse at the start that probably will go all the way, and it has to, from that early age, show everything really. Whereas in our world, you can buy something, as you said, that might look a little bit ordinary, but is fairly okay at everything. And then it is the one that goes on. And if you could go back and ride a cross country at Badminton on one of your previous horses that you're not riding anymore, which one would that be?
I think it'd be Midnight Dazzler. He was the first really good horse I rode. He was a horse who was a very difficult horse. He was very highly strung. He'd fallen quite a lot with a number of different riders, and he came to me at the end of when he was 13, right at the end of that year. So I basically started riding him when he was 14, and he was basically sort of being semi-retired by going to a sort of young person, and a young person who no one was too worried if something went wrong, because he was a bit of a gamble from that point of view. And he taught me a lot because he was very difficult, and I probably found a key which maybe being super keen and young and not having other horses to ride made me really explore and take time and learn, and not have an ego, but really just try and sort of find a way with him. And he went on to, I think he did about 7 Badmintons and Burleys and retired. He was in the top 10 at Badminton when he was 19. He had lots of top 10 placings, and was just a wonderfully fast, athletic, scopy horse that was just ooze class, and was just about trying to slow that brain down. And when we did, he was magical. And part of me sort of thinks, oh well, I wish I'd have him now because I know so much more now. And part of me thinks, well, thank goodness I had him at the time, because he taught me an awful lot. But then I also know that probably a lot of the challenges I found really difficult at the time, I would still find really difficult now. So it's quite easy to look back with rose-tinted glasses. And actually, he was quite a difficult horse.
And actually, did he then go on to a younger rider afterwards in his retirement? Because I just remember seeing him being led 2 people into the start box still at whatever age he was.
Yeah, he went to the daughter. So Lucy Lissac, the daughter of the breeder, which was lovely. And I actually went down there and jumped him round a cross-country course when he was about 24. And at 23, something like that. They used to have an event there, and it didn't happen anymore, but they said, come down at Christmas time and we got a surprise for you. And we went out and jumped around the farm. And if I didn't know how old he was and someone had said, do you want to take him to Badminton, the way he felt, I would have said definitely.
Wow. And a few more brilliant questions. So one here that says, what age did you start to take it seriously as a career? And well, you said from the age of 2. And what pathway did you take to achieve it?
So yeah, I mean, I basically always wanted to do it. I grew up in a sort of slightly strange sort of environment in that because my father was sort of entrenched in the sport, and I sort of thought that eventing was a mainstream sport, similar in size to football, and it was really simple. I loved horses. I loved horses from when I was small, before any thought of either competing or career or anything like that was really understood by me. And so it was just something I loved and I wanted to do. And I guess that's what still sort of motivates me. But it meant there was never really that moment where I thought I'd quite like to become an event rider. It was sort of from day one. What was the other part of that question?
The other part of that question was then, do you have any advice for the best way to help an ambitious teen progress to a top level in dressage without parents having the budget to buy a horse?
Yeah, I think probably what I said before, which is which is understand that the world doesn't owe you a favor, and therefore how are you going to do it? And my parents said to me right at the beginning, look, we're not going to ever, I think they've been so involved in the sport, they weren't going to live their sporting ambition through me, if that makes sense. And probably were almost slightly hesitant about whether they wanted me to have a career in the sport. And so they said right from the beginning, they'd always said, look, we're great if you want to do it, but we're not going to own horses for you. And so actually it was realizing, and from I don't think it was intended as that, but actually that was a big advantage, because I sort of realized from day one that if I want to do this, I need to work out how I can do it, and riding for people and providing them with what they want to get out of it, and understanding what they want to get out of it, and for them to enjoy it. And so I'd say, yeah, I mean, try and get as much experience as you can, and the right kind of experience. My background wasn't sort of heavily taught. It was, my father believed very much in a sort of instinctive way of letting a child or a young person learn through feel and experience, and not being sort of taught and drilled, and that I think was quite important. But also, particularly in the dressage world, of being in learning from people with the right principles and values, and then just getting as much experience and working hard, and trying to make a way of doing it that you can actually compete and succeed, whilst those around you enjoying it and wanting to continue on that journey.
But also, I think what you're touching on there is not only being a great rider, but also having those human and personal skills to be able to build teams around you and share those great experiences with potential owners.
Yeah, and I think that is, I find that a really fun part of it, because I enjoy communicating, and I enjoy training horses, and I enjoy understanding horses, and therefore, if you can articulate that, then actually part of it is you're trying to give anyone involved with that horse the understanding, as if they have been training and producing and competing the horse themselves, and it makes it much more fun and much more interesting, and really important that it's warts and all. It's any concerns, any worries, any difficult days, that actually it makes it a much more interesting journey if they're party to all of that.
And I think sometimes that's a really missed part with a lot of young riders I see sometimes, is we focus so much on the riding and forget that actually there's lots of people involved, and they are not as important as the horse, but just as important on the journey as well. Yeah,
massively. And it's it's absolutely key, because without owners you wouldn't have horses. But also it makes it much more fun. It makes it really fun to have people you really enjoy being on this journey with, to share in it.
Couple more brilliant questions. If you could have your time again, would you do anything differently?
Yeah, probably lots. But it's interesting. I mean, one thing was I probably developed a sort of a way of producing horses that really enabled them to be the very best they could be. And probably the mistake in that was I was for quite a few years applying that to horses that really were very limited. And so my mistake was probably not um, giving up on horses quick enough or moving them on or whatever, because um, you know, you don't want to treat a good horse like a bad horse. I was almost in danger of treating a bad horse like a good horse, if that makes sense. It's really sort of producing them to be the very best they could be. And actually, sometimes, it's a case of saying, right, this horse is going to be a really great pony club horse, or a really great junior horse, or a really great whatever. And so, sometimes in a way, that's the sort of complexity of life, that often one's greatest strength is also your greatest weakness. And it's probably just a bit of experience and understanding how you would not totally change the whole approach, but just tweak it so you can get the best of it.
But again, if you hadn't have had those experiences, you wouldn't be in the system you're in.
And it's no good. It's no good just sitting back thinking, oh, one day I'll get a really good horse and I'll be a really good rider. It's about trying to train horses, and the whole time you're training horses, they're training you, and you've got this sort of a two-way thing where you're developing and you're learning, and they're developing and they're learning, and that then in the future you get on a good horse. You can't then suddenly decide, now I've got to become a good rider. You all those normal experiences have shaped you to then be able to hopefully be the rider you are for when the moment matters, and you never know when that is.
Totally, and that's great advice, because I think it can be tricky, being a young rider in the lorry park and seeing very, very fancy horses with other young riders. And but as I try and instill in them, is you're trying to be the best rider you can in 15 years time when that horse
And
comes
also,
along.
the worst thing is, people always talk about the sort of social media, but actually almost the worst thing is being able to access results. Because when I was, and I don't feel that old, but when I was first competing, if you wanted to get a horse's results, there wasn't a website, because I don't think the internet existed, and you could ring up the BHTA, which is British Horse Trial Association, and you could pay £5 and you could get a fax with a horse's record. And so you'd sort of do that if you were going to buy a horse, but otherwise you couldn't. People didn't look up results, and they didn't, and so it meant that your approach to competing was much simpler. You really thought about you, the horse, and the owner, and that was just a sort of a much purer way of doing it. Whereas for young people now, sort of feeling under the spotlight, feeling that if they go and sort of knock 4 fences down, or have a stop cross country, or do a really disappointing dressage, or whatever, that everybody's watching them. And actually the simple thing is, no one is really watching them, because the rest of the world is so busy thinking about themselves that they're not critiquing someone's misfortune. But that's, I think, the thing that young people have to deal with today.
And then it doesn't enable those little mistakes to happen, which need to happen in order to become the great rider you want to be.
Yeah, and we all make mistakes. We all fail a lot of the time. It's quite normal.
Another great question: who other than your dad inspired you, or still does? Someone you admire?
I mean, lots of people. As I said, I spent time with William Fox Pitt. He was a great person to be based with. I loved his philosophy and mindset and whole approach to the horses. Probably I didn't take out that much from a training point of view. It wasn't like he was a coach, but I think I took more out as a philosophy than as a sort of technical pieces. I mean, there's lots of people who you sort of pick up bits from over the years, and you often find yourself thinking, oh, I remember, so and so doing that exercise, when we were 17 or whatever. There's people who really shape you, but I'd say of the riders, it was William who probably made the biggest impact.
And if you all the current riders who are still competing at 5-star were all going around badminton, you could watch one of them go first around the course before you went, who would it be?
Really good question. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess actually it's more about seeing a horse that has a similar characteristics to your horse. That's probably the slightly more sort of technical objective that you're looking from it. But from an, there's some great combinations. It's always fun watching, whether it's Tim Price, whether it's whether it's Roz, or it doesn't matter who it is. There's and that's why it's fun competing abroad as well. You see lots of different riders, but it's yeah.
But the brilliant thing again about our sport in general in all three phases is I always think you can take a silhouette of three different riders, yourself, Tim and Roz, make it black and white, and you'd still know who it is just from the way they ride, and you can have three brilliant cross country rounds but completely different riders out there. Yeah,
and that's where it's developing your own style and being being well aware of it.
And on style, someone said, when you go cross country, you ride very short in your stirrups. Is that just your natural way you have developed, or natural way you're going, or have you developed that style for specific reasons? And just before you start this, can I say, because I've always obviously admired the way you go cross country, and some, I've tried putting my stirrups very, very short, went through a period and wasn't for me. So
I think that I have thought about cross country a lot throughout my whole life, and I probably started to develop more than 20 years ago I guess it was a variation on a theme of different things, and sort of understanding how horses go, and understanding how it affects a horse, and understanding what you take as the current norm is not going to be the same in 50 years' time. When you look at footage of someone 50 years ago, or someone 50 years before that, you can date it. You look at pictures from the 1840s of the Derby and their riding, so dressage length, it's unrecognizable from today. And I was, I think, conscious of that, and conscious of, I'd always enjoyed cross country. It's something I found relatively easy, and then started playing around with it, and started to develop a style of riding that was probably a bit different, and requires, in a way, a degree of balance. But if you can feel comfortable up there, then it makes life very easy, and you influence the horse in a completely different way. Everything is different. The steering is different. The way you use your leg is different. The way you, and that, that's something that's I guess I went a little bit, I don't think off on a tangent. The idea was maybe a little bit beyond what people were doing at the time.
And would you ride all of your top horses with the same stirrup length, or would it change with each one?
No, the same. A wide horse, so a very narrow horse might be one hole shorter. But yeah.
And the young horses, when you're trying to wobble a baby around, are you just as short?
I am, yes, just as short.
Oh wow. I think that's more impressive than going quick and short.
Yeah, and I did think, like when I was, I remember hunting horses and use that a little bit as a sort of, I would do things like I would go up impossibly short or impossibly long, or just explore. And this was that was the sort of sketchbook for what became a sort of the main thing.
I think I'm more impressed now learning that you can ride a baby horse over a little skinny triple brush with your stirrups that short than I am watching you go around a 5-star with your stirrups that short. Some other great questions coming in. What is one piece of equipment you can't live without? And I'm going to say one piece of equipment on the yard and one piece of equipment sort of ridden wise or out of competition.
I think that, it's interesting with, I guess that there are lots of things. It's interesting when you look at what is your standard go-to thing. And so if a new horse comes into the yard, I would, and this is where everyone's a little bit different, but my normal bit I would put in a horse would be a Springer D-shaped egbert. It's a very comfortable, secure bit, and that would be my starting point. And for me, it's just the simplest bit. I think there's something quite rewarding about the German engineering and the fact that it's been around a long time, rather than the sort of cheap made in China sort of thing that is probably less expensive, but bits don't tend to wear out if they're metal. So that would be one thing. What else would be my go-to?
What is something that the girls at the yard couldn't live without?
Good rugs for horses. Our horses are out a lot. So we use horseware turnout rugs, which are really they're properly waterproof. There's nothing worse for a horse than being wet through, so that they're properly waterproof, and you can layer them up. So I have to say I am not a great shopper, but the Redpost app does make life a lot easier. And
they're very good with their next day's delivery as well.
Yeah, thankfully I don't get as involved as I used to.
I can attest that they are. What body protector do you use?
I use I use race safe body protector. So for me, it wants to be super light, and basically anything you use, you want to not notice. That's my approach. So.
And do you wear an airbag as well?
I don't.
No. And hat wise, what are you in hat wise?
I am actually playing around. I'm actually sort of slightly playing around a few different hats. I had a the hat that I'd always used that I felt very comfortable in. I was actually slightly seeing when you've been in the same thing for a long time. What else is out there? So I previously and had ridden in Charles Owen hats, and I was slightly seeing what else is out there at the moment. So bit of exploring.
Yes. And someone else has said, why do you show jump in your red jacket? What does that mean?
So that was my father's jacket. So it's not a hunting coat, which some people assume it is. It's a red coat that, he had it, and I guess about 20 years ago I started wearing it just for the big ones, and I never quite knew whether it's sort of it is, I guess it was more normal then, and over time jackets have got shorter, and I haven't changed mine. So it is what it is, and it's not the same as everyone. But I also think that with I remember watching athletics. They have their series called the Diamond League, and they had 8 people lining up for a sprint, and 7 out of the 8 were wearing the same color lycra strip, and they were all from different nations. And I remember the commentators saying, "This is ridiculous. They got it sorted out." And it's a little bit the same with, when you get on the show jumping day, on the last day, you get person after person coming in the same color coat. That actually, I often think for children in the crowd, it probably makes it more interesting. Add a bit of color.
So this year at badminton, so everyone's going to listen to this conversation. You're going to see rainbow jackets. You're going to see orange jackets, pink jackets. Redpost are going to start doing a whole line of different colour jackets for everyone to wear into the show jumping. Obviously, Harry, everyone's wanting you to go down a runway with all of your equipment on, because now we're asking what stirrups you use.
I use tech stirrups, which are the ones which are the deformable side. Unfortunately, through experience, I've learned the benefits of those. Next one.
Well, no. Now, do you clip your horses before their big events? Was the next
question.
So
they all. The badminton ones have just been clipped, and we use Heinegger clippers, which are brilliant. And I say we. I can actually clip quite well, but I don't do very much of it. Anyway, they get clipped. So they've just been clipped now.
So
and
we see
the Kentucky ones were clipped 10 days ago. Yeah,
if we see a little heart in Lily's pony's bottom, we'll know that was your work then.
Yes, exactly. History of art.
Yeah, good. Are there any other products that you can think of now that you've had a little bit more time to think that come to mind that maybe perhaps you didn't know about or hear of before you started working with the brilliant guys at Redpost, and now they've opened your eyes?
They suggested Kentucky boots for the horses, which are great. The ones I used to use were had neoprene in the inside, and they were good, but they would get very heavy, and they would slip when they got heavy behind, particularly the hind boots, whereas the Kentucky boots have been great. When did you last muck out? Good question. I actually last mucked out a couple of days ago for a photo shoot. But I do.
That doesn't count.
So I've got to be really careful here, because if Jess and Molly are watching, which I don't think they are, but just in case they are, they see a recording of this, I've got to be truthful in this. I have to say I don't muck out very often, because I'm not allowed probably near doing something that they would say I wouldn't do well enough. And I'm normally told my best use of my time is to get on a horse and shut up.
Stick to your lane, know what you're good at
in
life. It's coming up to 9 o'clock, and I think everybody is probably getting sick of my voice, loving listening to your voice, Harry, and is probably wanting to go and have their dinner. But it's been an absolute pleasure chatting. I mean, I could go on until midnight if anyone wants to, but probably not.
Yes, thank you both so much for your time tonight. It's been such an interesting evening hearing from both of you, and sort of understanding a little bit more about the background in an eventer's day-to-day life. If anyone does have any other further questions, we can always take them sort of over email, and we can try and sort of field those back to you. But yeah, thanks everyone so much. And obviously, if you want to shop like Harry, you just pop across to Redpost.
Well, can I just say thanks for organising it, Cam? It's always great fun, and we should definitely do another. I enjoyed it when you brought your horse up, and we should another one of these. And Sophie, thank you for all your support at Redpost, because you are brilliant when we're trying to pack to go abroad and we suddenly need something, you guys are great at not only getting it to us, but telling us exactly what we need, why we need it, and what's the best version. So thank you to all of you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And good luck, Harry, at Kentucky and badminton.
Thank you.
And I think maybe after Kentucky and badminton, we need to do a follow-up one and see how all those brilliant horses did.
Exactly. It'll be good fun.
Perfect.
Best of luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.